Now that you know how divs work, you can begin using them to make a complete layout for your page. We did this with the header, and I've taken the liberty of adding some different styles to be able to lay out the header in a certain way, as well as creating some divs for the other sections of your page. So you'll find that in the sidebar on the right. You can grab this code and put it in your style sheet. So I just put it at the bottom of the style sheet, replacing the header that I had previously. And I've got a header section, a nav section that has some unique aspects to it that I'll cover in a minute. We have a section div, which is going to contain most of our content. And then we have a footer div that is going to have any of the items that go down below it. So if we take a look at what's happening here in each of these IDs for these sections, we're going to use the position relative. And all that means is that the div is going to flow in the page where it is located in the HTML document. So it's just going to flow one right after the other, depending on its location in the HTML document. This is in opposition to something called position absolute, where you say specifically where you want that item to go on the page from the top or from the left. And from a standpoint of having the most flexible layout that'll work consistently on different devices, I think your best bet would be to stick with position relative as much as possible. There are times when you need to use absolute positioning. We want to center the boxes on the page, since we're using fixed pixel width right now. And that is accomplished by using this margin auto. It's just a little trick that you can use. It's going to do the margins on both sides as automatic, and it's going to center the div on the page. Then we've got a series of borders here that I'm using the shorthand to control all at once, the size, the style, and the color. And I have a width of this box of 950px and a height of 75 with a background color that's a slightly different gray than the one up here. I have a nav that has some of the same characteristics, except it is going to be red in the background. There are some unique aspects of the nav that I'll talk about in a minute. And then there's a section div that we're going to use for the rest of our content on the page, and that's going to have a white background. And then a footer div that's pretty much like the rest, except it's going to have a colored background that's another gray color, and it's only going to be 40 pixels high. Now the section div does not have a height associated with it because we want that to expand based on the content that is in that div, and that will accomplish that. So we can save this, and we want to be able to then apply these styles where they need to be in the HTML page. Now we've already done the header. We created that in the last exercise. Now we need to establish the place on the HTML page for the other IDs. So I'm just going to say for the nav, div ID equal nav, and it's going to go on this section right here where we've created our navigation, and we're going to close it when the nav closes. And we want to be careful that everything on the page is in some sort of a div. So here's the rest of the content on our page, and we call that section. And I'll come down here and close it after the majority of the rest of the content is finished. And then just this last little bit on the page, we will put in a footer. So it's just div ID equal footer. And we'll close that. So you can see we have everything on the page now that's contained in a div, and we've been able to establish these sections on our pages so that we'll be able to start seeing a layout associated with it. So if we save that and come back here to our page and refresh it, we can see that every item of content on the page is in some sort of a box of the colors that we had designated. It's that simple to start laying out your pages. Now, in order for these divs to be applied to all of your pages, you obviously have to go into your other pages. In this case, I'd go into my About page and my Links page, and I would add my header div, my nav, my section, and my footer to make sure that everything on those pages was also contained within the divs. The other thing that you could do is start with one page as a template and then just change the content on it. So whichever way you want to go about doing it, all that matters is that you have all your pages that have the style sheet attached and that you have all the content on each of your pages into the divs that you have designated via your style sheet. Now, one thing I didn't point out when we were going over the style sheet are what these individual styles are for elements within your nav div. And so you can create styles that are only applicable to a certain ID. So in this case, there's a list inside our nav. That's how we created our navigation, was we created that list. But we want it to look a certain way now. We wanted to get rid of the bullets, and that's what this does. So it makes a very special style that only applies to the lists that are in the nav. Any other list on the page will not have these styles associated with it. So this list style type gets rid of the bullets, and the padding actually lets us play with how we want that list positioned in that div. And then for list item, the display in line lets us display it so it is horizontal instead of vertical, and also applies some padding. And then the A's inside the nav have their own styles so that they are not the same color as the rest of the links on the page. They have a unique color for them being visited, or when they're first there. And actually in this case, we have the visited A as the same as the non-visited A. In the case of a navigation bar, you don't want that changing colors based on whether somebody's visited or not in most cases. And we remove the underline for that. And then we also have a special color for the hover. And so that shows you how you can create unique styles for elements within a certain div. So coming back here to see the result of that, we have a horizontal nav bar instead of vertical. There are no bullets on this list any longer. And when I hover over, I have a certain color that comes up, which is different than what happens with the other kind of normal links on the page. So go through your own pages, create a header, nav, section, and footer for each of your pages, and get your site into this type of a layout. And then we'll talk about being able to establish other types of style sheets and create other types of layouts in the next lesson.